So welcome officially to our second ever Chicago Roundtable on Science and Religion. Some of you have participated in others of them that were online over the last few years. When we first joined the program, it was deep in the pandemic, and so some of we piggybacked on the online events other institutions hosted, but this is the second of our own. So thank you. But a few of you were at our last in-person event in November. Raise your hands if you were at that one. All right. So that shows that it was a good one the last time. It was worth coming again. This time, trying to think how much to talk, because I really want Professor Hoang to have as much time as she can. I just want to give an overview of how we've been thinking about this program. One of the things we've discovered as we've been talking to folks here at Chicago and the related institutions is that there are not a lot of places where we can have informal, low-stakes conversations across disciplines about the questions of meaning and value and what do we do about the mess that the world is in and all of those things, or what delights us, all of those things. And we hope that these roundtables will be a place where we can do just that. We were delighted. One of the things we wondered for our second event was whether the hard sciences people would show up for a sociologist. And they have. I'm very glad of that. Just to give an overview of how we've been thinking about it, just to help you think about why we are making this particular focus, one of the things that we were thinking about as we began to talk about what it might mean to have this program here at Chicago is what are the, I'm going to close this door because I don't think that people else is coming. Or, come on. The bread has arrived. We thought a bit about what are the themes or experiences that are shared between the sciences, hard and soft, and religious practice and belief. And so we came up with three overall themes. The first, which we talked about, we focused on in our last event, is wonder and curiosity. My sense is that if you're going to go and get a PhD in something, which is a particular kind of choice, that there is something that you're passionate about, something that you're curious about, something that fills you with awe, I hope. And those of us in religious traditions, well, that kind of goes with the territory. Our second theme, which we're going to focus on tonight, is that of authority and truth. And as we said in the emails that we sent out inviting you to this event, those are both concepts and experiences and functions that in both of those realms have been questioned and challenged and outright under attack in recent years. What does that mean? What does it mean to have authority? What does it mean to talk about truth? Our third theme, which we hope to engage in the fall with a speaker to be determined, is that of communication and trust. Once we've discovered something, once we know something that we want to share, how do we do that? And how do we know we can trust you? So, last fall, I still don't know why I went and looked at this, but I pulled up the video of the Aims of Education address from the incoming college students, and heard a fascinating address from Professor Hoang, where she talked about the research that she had done, which she'll talk about in a bit, and the kind of surprising response to the results of her research. And I thought, oh, yes. What does it mean to do research, to present your results and have people say you're wrong? Not necessarily because of the data, but because of a worldview that people bring to that. And so she graciously agreed to talk to me, and then graciously agreed to come. And we've already had a lot of fun talking. We should have recorded our conversation before y'all even arrived today. And so we're going to engage in a more conversational mode than in our last event, which had slides and everything. but I think it will be just as rich. And so I will invite you to come forward and join us. She's going to present a little bit about the research that caused such a, I don't know if kerfuffle is the right response, the right description. And we'll explore a little bit about what that might mean, and then we will talk at our tables to go a little bit deeper. So, welcome. And I'm going to sit far enough away that I don't have to wear a mask. So I'm going to let you start and talk a little bit. Can everyone hear and see well enough from the back? Okay. I'm going to let you talk a little bit about the research, its results, and how people responded.
Great. So first of all, thank you for having me here. And I have to say that I'm a new parent, a pandemic mother to an 18-month-old. So I didn't actually know about this secret society and that it was the audience were faculty from campus. And 3 days ago when Sam sent out the email, I thought, oh my gosh, and I was like much more nervous than what I would have been not knowing. And so I just will say thank you so much for coming out tonight and spending an evening, and I hope that this just sort of kicks off more interesting conversations at the dinner table. So my first book is titled Dealing in Desire, Asian Ascendancy, Western Decline, and the Hidden Currencies of Global Sex Work. And so just broadly, the study, and I was telling some folks at the dinner table that I just finished my second book, and so my mind is in that and not in the first book. So broadly, the book is it's an ethnographic study of the sex industry in Vietnam. And what that means is that I, as a graduate student, did deep kind of participant observation, what that means for those in the sciences is that I worked in a hostess bar as a hostess in 4 different sex bars in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And at the time, I went into the field really interested in trying to understand. I grew up in a very patriarchal household, and I talked about this in the aims of education. And I was really, at the time, I went into the field with a lot of feminist ideas about women's empowerment, about critiques of patriarchy, and embedded in that was a story of human trafficking, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with or have heard of or seen an ad somewhere. And so I thought that I was going to Vietnam to find and rescue and help save or better understand women who are victims of trafficking. And that but I started by going to nonprofit organizations as a way of trying to find women to interview. And I was surprised because when I showed up in Vietnam and went to various nonprofit organizations, it turns out that they weren't working with trafficked victims. They were working with women who were survivors of domestic abuse. And actually there were no women who were trafficked in any of these organizations. And so I was convinced that, well, the organizations just can't find them because it's underground, it's hidden. So I'm gonna go find them by working in these bars. And so I started working as a hostess worker in one bar I wanted to look at different niche markets across class. So the work basically involved, doing what all of the women do, working 12 hours a day, sitting, dancing, whatever. I mean, there was a line I obviously didn't cross, but I learned a lot behind the scenes. And so one thing that I would say, one finding was that took me 15 months of sustained research to finally sort of accept was that none of these women were trafficked victims. And in fact, there's a logic and a moral order inside of these bars that explains why they're there and how we have to think about structures of patriarchy and actually feminist ideas that I went armed into the field with in very different ways. And the logical sort of explanation was that, most of the women, their other options were either work as domestic workers, as maids, or in factories, garment factories, where actually Nike, Gap, Coach, Vietnam is very big on many of these factories. If you look at your labels of your clothes, you'll see made in Vietnam pretty much now everywhere. North Face is made there. I mean, I've been into many of these factories. And there they work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and are served one meal and make $100 a month. And ironically, in the hostess bars where they work, in the lowest paid hostess bar, they just for drinking and getting tips for sitting and chatting with clients, and this is not even in paid sex yet, they could make that in one evening. And so oftentimes women whose family members became very ill sort of stepped into the sex industry thinking that it was a temporary solution to solve an immediate crisis, and actually found that they had far more autonomy over their bodies and were not subjected to rape and harassment in the ways that they were in domestic work settings and in factory settings. So that's one piece of it. And so that kind of finding was really hard to articulate because it really butts up against religious organizations that were working on issues of human trafficking, nonprofit organizations who've raised a lot of money around human and sex trafficking in particular, to frame it around a labor issue and around labor and not sex, actually, and to really think about this as a labor problem. And it also, I think, butt up against a lot of feminist scholarship, whose scholarship I admired and went into the field with, and theories I admired and went into the field armed with, thinking that I was going to expand on. I think the other finding was that this happened around the 2008 financial crisis, and so I was working in 4 different bars, one bar that caters to very wealthy Vietnamese and Asian businessmen, a bar that catered to Western businessmen, a bar that catered to overseas Vietnamese men who'd left Vietnam after the war and were returning, and a bar that catered to Western backpackers, so Western guys who are budget travelers. And because of the financial crisis, I was just bored in these hostess bars. As you can imagine, the conversations aren't very smart. And I learned a lot about these men and where they were coming from, and it turned out that most of the Western businessmen were former Wall Street bankers who worked for Lehman. A lot of them were former Lehman bankers, who actually moved to Shanghai and then Hong Kong before getting headhunted to help build financial markets in Southeast Asia. And in the high-end market, it was primarily Korean, Taiwanese, Chinese, Malaysian, Hong Kong, Singaporean businessmen. And what I was witnessing on the ground were business deals that were at a volume that were far larger with Asian businessmen. And actually this is the sort of theme of my second book project, which is titled Spiderweb Capitalism. We're probably not going to be able to talk about it today, but it's coming out with Princeton Press in September, and it's at the printer. But anyways, and so I was making another argument, which is an argument about Asian ascendancy and Western decline. And the argument was that for countries like Vietnam, foreign direct investment going into that country was not coming primarily from the United States or the IMF or World Bank or Western nations or even Europe. It was coming primarily from China, Hong Kong, South Korea, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. And so when I returned to the United States, and this is 2010, 2011, and I start presenting ideas around Asian ascendancy and Western decline, everywhere, Brown University, so many places that I was invited to give talks, not just as job talks for faculty positions, but just regular talks. It really kind of struck a nerve, particularly among white men. And people would say, you can't make that kind of argument with the data you have, you can't draw claims of cause, blah, blah, blah. And now, by now we all understand the rise of Asian economies and the decline of Western economies, and it all makes sense. But at that time, it was just so counterintuitive, and yet I still felt like the data had to speak for itself. And so those are kind of 2 pieces of the puzzle that I think address some of the questions. And I think there's more there, but I'll stop.
You could just keep talking. That would be fine. Was there a moment where you could sort of feel your perspective shift on things? You came in with a certain understanding, certain assumptions. Was there a moment or a series of moments that you can look back on and say, this is where I had to revisit the assumptions I brought in?
So there were 2 that I can think of that were cumulative, I would say. The first is that, and I don't talk about this very much in the book because it felt very raw and vulnerable at the time. And I think as a tenured faculty member now, I don't care, and it's 10 years has gone by and I feel very distant. But as a graduate student doing research, as an Asian woman graduate student doing research on the sex industry in Asia, there was a certain level of vulnerability that I felt, a huge level of vulnerability that I felt in these bars. I mean, I was drinking, I noticed the gin there, and I was like, it reminds me of those days. I mean, I was drinking a handle a day, a whole thing of that, over 14 hours, 7 days a week, and also trying to lose 10 pounds to fit into the aesthetic of these bars, right? And I was 10 years older than most of those women. And so one part of it was that in my feminist imagination, I was the empowered woman, and they were the women I was going to try to understand and write about and save, right? I had my own sort of feminist rescue ideas, and in that space, I was far, far more vulnerable than they were, and I was like just really kind of taken by their agency, by their wit, by their and I think that was really jarring. But the other thing that I would say that I went to this with was that as an Asian American woman, thinking about, particular stereotypes of white men going to Asia, buying sex, it conjures up a lot of stereotypes. And one is that, these men, you probably have them and can think of them. And what was striking to me was how much these men were getting duped by the women I was studying for lots of money, like $50,000 at a time, $100,000, and all of the ways in which these men were getting duped. And I just I just couldn't wrap my head around it. Like, and the ways in which these men were going into debt, financial businessmen. I mean, it was ripping families apart. They were going into financial debt. They were taking out mortgages on their homes in the United States. I mean, and it wasn't coming from it wasn't just about buying sex, but it was their own kind of vision of rescue. Because what would happen is that these women would use tropes of human trafficking to tell the men, I'm a victim of trafficking, this bar is making me do things, there's gangsters running these bars, save me from this place, if you build me a village home and help me start a business, you can help me get out of here. And it was those circulating tropes in the West that enabled these women to dupe these men. And so I started going on village. So, I mean, there were so many, I think those are the two moments that I think really crystallized for me, thinking about women's agencies and also thinking about the ways in which men were similarly vulnerable in a very different way, in a cultural and in a local setting that they were completely unfamiliar with.
Wow. So much. There's so much here. How then did this change how you approach your research going forward?
I think hindsight is 20/20. I mean, it's very strange. I mean, I come from a very working class background. Neither of my parents went to college. I did this project. It was a passion project, and it was. The fact that I'm sitting here, it's like sometimes I can't even believe it. I think, and so. I've actually been thinking about this question in the pandemic because I think that there's something about being a graduate student where there's, and coming from a working class background where there's nothing at stake. And so really the data and the science in some ways is driving the argument. And since I've moved to the University of Chicago, I think there are a lot of filters that I bring to my research in a way where it's such an intensely critical place, and it's a place where it's hard to come forward with half-baked ideas. At least people exist in other parts of the university, and it may feel different, but I think that the way so I had literally just had a conversation with a graduate student in my office, and I said, like, there seemingly doesn't feel like there's as much room for failure. And I said to the student literally an hour ago, like, who you are today in my office is not who you're going to be intellectually a week from now and who you're going to be a year from now. And I think I have to remind myself of that too as I was going forward with my second book project, because my second project is a study of financial elites and how they use offshore vehicles to make investments in frontier markets. And actually, that's really something that's terrifying to do at a place like the University of Chicago, because the financial elites that I study are our board of people that are, our board of trustees, and it's really it's thinking about the ways in which universities are, and the data that we produce from this are implicated in the science that we produce. And so I think a lot about, I think differently, as I've matured as a human and as a scholar, but I also think about, I kind of miss that early time when I didn't feel like there was as much at stake, or I didn't have those, those voices on my left shoulder making me question, how I would frame things for a particular kind of audience. It was just about the data and about the science.
Yeah. So this is a question we did not talk about ahead of time. So one of the things that I think about, so as a female clergy person in the Christian tradition, I think about my authority in the church a lot. There were not a lot of models for what that meant. The models were male, mostly, and the earliest generation of women, right? How does this make you, does that experience make you think about your authority, given the multiple identities you bring into this, right? As a woman, as an Asian woman, at the time you were doing the research as a graduate student and a younger woman, how has this made you think about your authority to speak and to draw conclusions based on your work? What do you think about that?
So, so I grew up in a very Catholic family, and a Catholic refugee family. So there are 9 Catholic priests in my family, all across the board from, there are no Jesuits, but they're Franciscans and Salesians. And actually, I full disclosure, I guess I would just say this, because now that I have tenure, I don't really care what anyone thinks. But I don't participate in the church anymore because at least my experience with the Catholic Church was very male dominant and extremely patriarchal. And when I was invited to give the Aims of Education address at the University of Chicago, first of all, I was like, what? I actually ignored the email because I thought the invitation was to serve as a faculty discussant, not to give the address. So and then Jim Sparrow called me and said, did you get the email? John Boyer is asking if you would give the Aims of Education address. And I was like, what? Oh, because, but there was something that was so symbolic about that moment, because for my family to see a woman standing at the Rockefeller Chapel on a pulpit giving a 45-minute address was it was a kind of an out-of-body experience. And also because on that I talked about patriarchy, and I talked about growing up in a household where women were not supposed to get PhDs, and where if women pursued higher education they were unmarriageable, and all that was the kind of worldview that I came with. And so, in that setting and in that environment, I think of authority through a very different lens. But I would say, as a first generation woman of color on this campus, and I think about authority, Kathy, I don't know if many of you were there, but Kathy Cohen gave the Ryerson lecture just this past Tuesday, and she's somebody who I hold with high regard as a senior, woman of color that I really respect. And she said, oh, I'm very nervous. I feel very vulnerable in this moment because you always feel like an outsider, even though, and that really resonated with me, because even on this campus, there's a way in which I feel like my arguments have to be airtight. The theory has to be, I have to ratchet it up the theory. There's just no room for, there's very little room for forgiveness or failure, or people are not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And so, if you go at the king, you best not miss, there's just not a lot of room. And I think that now that I'm done with that second book, and I'm very proud of it, it was still coming from a place of that versus a place of thinking creatively, thinking about failure, thinking about, and so now I think about how can you do research and speak from a place of authority while also being honest about all of the missteps along the way, which I think is very different based on your position and based on the environment that you're in.
So you're coming close to this next question, which I think will be my last one, so that you can eat and we can have our conversation. What do you wish your colleagues understood about the research you did and the reaction you received to it?
Oh. I wish that there were more dinner table conversations like this, because I think we imagine that this is a community that really believes in science and that there's one objective truth, and at least in the social sciences where I sit, causality is a big thing, and I think that leaves very little room for multiple truths, for subjective ways of seeing, for alternative lens, and I think also to kind of think about the filters that we bring with us when people are presenting data that is counterintuitive, or when we confront data that disrupts either things that we've become experts on and hold very dear. And I think that I just think as I think about what's next for me after my second book, and where I might go next, is just sort of how to return a little bit back to that kind of humility that I think we lose sight of, both in terms of like how we judge each other. I mean, this is such, I think I could go anywhere after the University of Chicago because people at Harvard and Princeton seem nice to me. Truly, like I think I test all my ideas here because I know that and it's the thing I love about this place is that I do think ideas level the playing field, but it also means that there's just not as much room for grace, for failure, and particularly as we I don't know. So that's kind of that's where I'm at now. Maybe it's a pandemic, maybe it's because I'm a mom now. That's where I'm at.
Wow. Yeah. No. Pandemic and mom. Thank you. So, feel free to go sit at the table, have your salad, and I'm going to say a couple and I'm going to just say a couple words about what we're going to do now. At the tables, we have a short list of proposed questions on a half sheet.